the so the under our charter, the which by the way acknowledged that the city manager was replacing or took the place of what a board of selectmen might be in another form of government when it was adopted by the city of Cambridge. And under the charter, chapter 41, section 98 gives the power to the city manager and the police commissioner to determine what weapons police officers may carry, and states specifically that police officers may carry within the Commonwealth such weapons as the chief of police or the board or officer having control of the police in a city or town shall determine. And in the city, of course, the appointing authority is the city manager, not the city council. So again, this underscores the fact that this is within the purview of the manager. So I also wanted to address a reference that was made to a Supreme Judicial Court opinion in the town of Amherst versus the Attorney General, which was a case that had to do with hunting, which is really a Second Amendment case of the ability of citizens to carry guns for personal purposes that are protected by the Second Amendment, which is not at all analogous to the issue in front of the council of the authority to regulate the use of weapons by municipal officials such as police officers. So I wanted to point out that that's really irrelevant to the issues before the council. And then finally, I wanted to make the point that in addition, as I think you all know, the Commonwealth further enacted an act relative to justice and equity in law enforcement in the Commonwealth in December of 2020, which is the police reform law. And that law actually addresses the use of tear gas and rubber bullets by municipal police officers by outlining the circumstances where they may be used, and requires the filing of a report with the Massachusetts Peace Officer Standard and Training Commission detailing the steps that were taken in advance to avoid the necessity of such use. And then if those weapons were used, it requires a report to be submitted thereafter. So I think that in looking at traditional statutory construction concepts, the recent act of the legislature in passing this law, again, further underscores that this is an area that the state has chosen to regulate in its own authority to enact state law, which regulates what police officers may or may not do. And to the extent that the city wanted to go further, that it follows from what I said previously, that it would be up to the police commissioner and the city manager to promulgate policies. So finally, I just wanted to make the point, and I don't know whether the commissioner had anything he wanted to add, that the commissioner has in fact already issued a policy with respect to the use of tear gas. So there is no present need for any additional policy or regulatory action on the part of the city at this time. And of course, I'm also happy to answer any questions the council may have about my prior legal opinions. Thank you.
Thank you, Solicitor Glower. Commissioner Bard?
Through the chair, yeah, I would just add that, as you all know, that last year I ordered all tear gas in our inventory destroyed, effectively banning the practice of us using it. And I did this on my own without any prodding from the council, even though we hadn't used it in more than 50 years or so. Earlier this year, I formalized it through our policy number 408, and I banned the use of tear gas. And in my opinion, this manner is the cleanest method and nearly uncontestable in banning tear gas or the use of any weapons in this city. State law clearly gives the authority to the police chief or the appointing authority to decide what weapons a police department uses. That's 41, section 98. So here in this city, it's nearly uncontestable that I possess the authority to do so. So I banned it, and to me, banned is banned. Or that the city manager on his or her own could ban any weapons in the police department or order the police commissioner to do so. So, in my opinion, is just the cleanest way. I concur with case in point, everything the city solicitor said. You know, she also talked about how it runs counter to the Plan E form of government. But it is really clear that the state legislature had the opportunity to act just not that long ago, and they chose not to put the full ban in. And they chose very precise language. And so that the authority to choose weapons still lies with the police chief or the appointing authority. And here, the crux of it is to have it banned in the city, and it is banned in the city. And to make the argument that, well, what if police leadership changes? Well, that same argument holds true that if the council turns over, that, you know, a counter ordinance could be implemented. So if the bottom line was to ban the use of tear gas in the city, that's done. If the point was to limit the indiscriminate use of weapons, kinetic weapons against peaceful individuals, that's already done through state policy. The Police Reform Act did that and requires everything that the counselor from the National Lawyers Guild said. So everything that we are sitting here talking about doing or having done is done at in some way, shape, or form, whether it be through state legislation or through local policy. And that's really all I have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, so getting some feedback somewhere.
They got a vacuum cleaner going outside.
Okay, questions from councilors.
Mr. Chair,
Councilor Sabrina Wheel.
could we give Mr. Foyer a chance to respond? He had a response from that.
Point of order.
Point of order, Councilor Simmons.
Thank you. You'd asked if if anyone had a question. My hand was up.
Oh,
I would like to, if I could have the floor, and then if the young man wants to speak after, that's fine. I apologize in advance. I do have to leave early and may not have the opportunity to exercise my right to make inquiry.
Councilor Simmons, I did not have my panel list up, so I did not see your hand, so that's on me. Before you go, I know the mayor has to leave at 6. Mr. Clerk, are we going to be good with a quorum if both Councilor Simmons and the Mayor Siddiqui leave?
I believe with yourself, the Vice Mayor, Councilor Nolan, Councilor Zonovan, and Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, you will have continue to have a quorum.
All right, just double checking. Councilor Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, for the floor. A couple of questions. I'm just curious. It's not my first question. If Mr. Forer has previous knowledge of what the City Council has done through the police department, but I'm not looking for an answer. I just want that answer in the record. The second thing I'm curious about, and it came up with Miss Glowa's testimony, I just want to be sure I'm correct. So it sounds like to me, although I've read it, it says we prohibit anyone that operates in Cambridge from using tear gas and other, I don't have the correct language, in our city. I'm not, and I hear that and I see that, I'm wondering how enforceable that is. It's not often that we call on for law enforcement from outside the city to be here, but there are the rare occasions that they are. And so I'm just curious, is just because we put it in writing, does it mean that it's enforceable? And the third thing, and this is through you, Madam Mr. Chair, to the city solicitor, if the commissioner has already banned it, and if he has discarded all weapons that are named in this ordinance, and just say for the purpose of conversation, the city council voted to adopt it, what would be the net result? Anything?
Solicitor Glower, the two questions, I think the first one is around sort of the mutual aid piece, and if other departments come into Cambridge, would they be bound by our rules and procedures? Maybe that's for the commissioner to answer.
Yeah, I'll take those. And the short answer is no. State police have full jurisdiction anywhere in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and their rules are applicable to them in wherever they go in the state. The same would hold true for any Middlesex County law enforcement officer, for instance, the Middlesex County Sheriff's Department. I don't have dominion over those agencies when they enter the city of Cambridge, or any coexisting law enforcement agency here, such as one of the university police departments. They're promulgated by their agency's rules and by state law as well.
Mr. Farrar, I'll go to you in a second, but I want Solicitor Glower to answer Councilor Simmons' second question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Councilor Simmons. I want to make sure I understood. I think if your question is if the policy of the commissioner already bans the use of tear gas and the council promulgates an ordinance that bans the use of tear gas, is there any difference? Because they both are doing the same thing. I think that practically speaking, there may not be a difference, except that, let's say the police commissioner decided to change the policy. It goes back to the question of whether the council has the authority to promulgate this ordinance. And I think for the reasons I've outlined previously, I don't think that the council has that authority.
Okay, that's thank you, Solicitor Glower. That's very helpful. I clearly understand my colleagues. I believe I understand my colleagues' motivations for bringing this forward. And it's part of the reason why I asked the gentleman, the young man that's from the NLG, what his prior knowledge of the city of Cambridge was, because, and I want, please have the record show this, the problem I have with this ordinance is that it's banning something that the city of Cambridge hasn't done, doesn't do, and has not done for a long time. And what I'm very, very concerned about is where is, and maybe I will ask that, there's some historical document gets attached to this ordinance that says, acknowledges the fact that we've not done this. We were proactive and we took proactive steps to make sure we were not using tear gas and not using these other items. I on the one hand, it's very good to want to protect the residents. We certainly do. And I stand behind that, but not while I don't want to do it at the expense of painting our public safety with a broad brush, so that one looking back at this or looking at it now gets the impression, as many people have that I've spoken to, says, oh, I didn't know we use tear gas, that's terrible. And then I have to say, oh no, we haven't used it in 100 years. So that's what my concern is. I'm not going to question the intent of my colleagues at this meeting, but I do want to have the record state, and I would love to something in the preamble, wherever it is appropriate, to acknowledge the fact that we are trying to be a progressive, proactive public safety organization that does put the citizen first while trying to make sure the city is safe. So to Ms. Glow, I want to thank you very much for getting back to me, answering my response. I have to think long and hard about supporting something that may not have the desired effect, because we're banning something that we've already banned. And if not, unless we have a charter change, which at which time if we did, we could revisit this, and the city council did indeed have the power and the ability to have more direct control over public safety, then I think this order would certainly be appropriate, because we certainly do want to ban those kinds of actions. I'm certain, I know my colleagues will not agree, but I would like the record to show my opposition, my concern that I guess it looks nice on paper, say we banned tear gas, only to say, but we've already banned tear gas 10 years ago. And it's in some ways feels a little bit duplicitous. But I will yield the floor, Mr. Chair. I apologize to my colleagues in advance for having to leave early. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Councilor. Before I go to the Vice Mayor, I'm going to go back to Councilor Sabrina Wheeler since I kind of messed up that order a few minutes ago. So Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a few points to that. I think that the most immediate one is that the preamble does say pretty clearly the Cambridge Police Department has not used tear gas in any capacity over the 30 years. We incorporated that from the get-go. It's been part of the preamble. We've tried to be really clear about that through the multiple iterations of that. So I don't know what else to add to that. I had some other pieces, but we'll yield to colleagues with questions.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looked like the commissioner had his hand up for a second.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say, obviously, I'm in support of anything that's designed to limit government's ability to abuse its citizens, first of all. But the preamble to a policy order, I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think we're talking about in the actual ordinance. It makes no reference to that. But that's all, and I probably shouldn't have raised my hand when you were talking, Councilor. I apologize.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to say that very thing, that I think the policy order did a really good job of introducing that narrative, but it could be added to the preamble of the ordinance should we pass it. I think Councilor Sabrina Wheeler did a good job talking about the physical effects of having these chemical agents, but I think we really need to think about the lingering mental health effects for folks who are peacefully protesting and are sprayed with chemical agents. It's something that I think stays with folks for a long time. And I know that the commissioner and I have talked many times about lingering mental health effects of interactions with the police. But so I did want to bring that up and have that on the record. I also appreciate the commissioner really putting forward a policy 408 banning the use of tear gas in the city of Cambridge. I think it was an important step, but I also think that we could go a little bit further and really make it clear that the city council is voting to move forward with banning chemical agents and kinetic weapons. I'm curious about. I understand Solicitor Glowa came forward with her recommendation, and that the council does not have the authority to pass this ordinance. My question really is, let's say we do pass this ordinance. What happens then? Is there a reviewing body that would tell us that no, in fact, we don't actually have the authority to do this? Or if it was just legally challenged, what would be the next step if the city council voted to move this forward by a majority?
Solicitor Glowa.
Mr. Chair. So there, first of all, there is no reviewing body for city ordinances like there is for town bylaws, which are required to be reviewed by the Attorney General. So there is no reviewing body. Secondly, with respect to, as I believe I've told the council previously, laws that are passed by the council are presumed valid unless struck down by a court of competent jurisdiction. That does not mean, however, that the council has the unfettered right to be passing laws that, again, in my view, and having done a lot of research with a number of lawyers, is beyond the council's authority. If it were to do so, then it would depend upon whether some third party decided to challenge the law, or if a circumstance were extreme enough and really did hinder the ability of the police department to do its work, or the city manager to exercise his role as the executive, there could be an action brought to invalidate the ordinance by the city manager or a member of the public seeking to have a court declare that it's invalid in excess of the council's authority.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the solicitor. So if there was an action brought forward to invalidate a possible passed ordinance by the city manager, what's the process by which that would be reviewed?
I'm sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, you mean what's the process by which he would file a lawsuit?
Then how would it be adjudicated?
In a court of law, probably the Superior Court of Massachusetts, which is where most local laws are challenged unless there's some federal component or reason to go to federal court. Likely it would be in the state trial court, which is the Superior Court.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, and just following that line. So it would essentially be the city manager versus the city council in that type of lawsuit, and who would represent the city and who would represent the city council?
Through you, Mr. Chair, first of all, I think that would be a regrettable situation, but if it were to come to pass, then obviously there would be a conflict in this office representing both parties. So there would need to be have a decision made as to which of the city parties that we would normally be representing would be represented by outside counsel. We have had this situation in the past, many, many years ago. The Commissioner of Inspectional Services, I think, sued the planning board, or the planning board sued the Commissioner of Inspectional Services. And so there are anomalous situations like that that occur periodically in municipalities. Actually, one of the cases that I cited in my original opinion to the council about this issue had to do with the city of Boston and its authority to, actually that was with respect to a different issue, but I did bring to the council's attention with respect to the issue of hiring its own counsel, that the city of Boston had a lawsuit involving the mayor of Boston and the Boston City Council. So the mechanics of who would represent who are to be determined if such regrettable circumstances were to occur. But yes, there would undoubtedly be a conflict, and this office would not be representing both municipal parties.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, and thanks to the solicitor for walking us through what that process would look like should we choose to go forward with passing this ordinance. I guess I'm not really quite, just on a different note, I'm not quite understanding. I understand that Somerville has a city council and a strong mayor system, so they're not a Plan E charter form of government. However, they just passed, their city council just passed this. And so it does feel a little bit like we might be able to do this. And I think that that's where some of the confusion is coming in. I understand the difference between a city and a town and the Board of Selectmen example that you brought up earlier, but it does seem like if our neighbors in Somerville City Council could move this forward, that there should be some way for us to move this forward in a similar fashion, even given that we have a planning charter. But I'll yield my time at this time. I know other people, I see a lot of hands up, but those were some of my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Before I go, and please, I don't want to butcher your Fuhrer. You're muted.
Foyer.
I'm sorry?
Foyer.
Foyer. Okay. Before I go to Mr. Foyer, we had one person signed up for public comment, but they don't actually seem to be there. And it's past 6 o'clock. So if we can maybe, Ms. Stefan, do you want to see if that person's there? And if not, we'll just close public comment and we can move on with our conversation.
One person was Taylor Larrick, and they have not joined the Zoom.
Okay. On a motion by Councilor Sabrina Wheeler to close public comment, roll call.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone, absent. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons, absent. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey, absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui, absent. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 in favor, 4 absent.
Okay. Mr. Foyer, you've been patiently waiting to respond.
Thank you.
So I'm going to have to disagree with the city solicitor as to the authority of the city council to pass this. She, first of all, attempted to make a distinction between the powers that a town or board of selectmen has and a city has. Under general laws, chapter 40, section 1, the state legislature has said that cities and towns are basically interchangeable in that cities shall have all of the powers of towns and such additional powers as are granted to them by their charters. Now, under Plan E, before we get to Plan E, there are two state laws that actually authorize a city or town to regulate the police. The first one is the one that the city solicitor addressed, which is chapter 41, section 97, which plainly says that selectmen may make suitable regulations governing the police department and the officers thereof. And given chapter 40, section 1, taking away the distinction in terms of power between towns and cities, that would apply. But more specifically, under chapter 40, section 21, towns may make, and I'm quoting the statute, such ordinances and bylaws as they may judge most conducive to their welfare, which may include ordinances for directing and maintaining their internal police. That cannot be clearer. In addition to which, the Supreme Judicial Court, the highest court in Massachusetts, has ruled twice in 1974 and in 1977 in two cases, and I'm going to supply a legal memorandum to Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, which he can pass out to you. The Supreme Court of Massachusetts has said it is to the city council that the legislature has committed the decision as to the proper operation of the police department, not the city manager, to the city council. And that's true under Plan E. So under Plan E.
So, Mr. I just, thank you. And I know the solicitor, I don't think we're gonna adjudicate this like a trial today. I mean, I think we're gonna have, there's clearly differences of opinion and the council's gonna have to decide what risks it's willing to take. I certainly appreciate the, you know, the alternative point of view, but I don't want to get too much into a dueling attorneys here stating their cases. I think we're not going to probably get to a conclusion, and I'm not sure there's going to get to be agreement on that. Did you have comments on the ordinance?
Yeah.
Sort of itself.
So this is much more than a ban on tear gas. So I completely appreciate Commissioner Bard's point of view and the actions that he's taken to ban the use of tear gas. But that does not address everything that the ordinance addresses, which includes the use of pepper spray, which he just recently saw used against protesters in Boston by police officers who were out of control. It doesn't address the fact that the ordinance requires a supervising officer, a captain, to authorize the use of these weapons. In Cambridge, I would assume, like it is in Boston, an individual police officer right now could make the decision to use a chemical weapon such as pepper spray, which the Cambridge police do have. They have not destroyed their store of pepper spray, nor have they destroyed their store of mace. So an individual police officer can make that decision and use that. And we have seen, unfortunately, too many individual police officers around the country make decisions that endanger peaceful citizens. We saw that on January 6th in the Capitol, when there were police officers involved in invading the Capitol. Police officers who were bringing weapons into the Capitol and invading the Capitol. We saw that in the city of Boston. So this ordinance goes much farther. It bans the use of any kind of chemical weapons, not just tear gas. And it also makes the senior officers, the well-trained, experienced senior officers under Commissioner Bard, responsible for making the decisions as to when these will be used, and takes it out of the hands of an individual officer who, for whatever reason, may decide that it's appropriate to use these weapons. And we've seen that. We've seen that around the country.
So
finally, I want to address one thing that Councilor Malone said, which is that if this ordinance is attacked in court, we have a severability clause in it, which says that if there is a particular section of the law that is deemed by the courts to be beyond the powers of the Cambridge City Council to enact, that part can be stricken, and the other parts of the ordinance still would remain. I think the only people who are going to bring a lawsuit like this is a police officer who uses these kind of weapons in violation of the ordinance. And in that case, I would certainly hope that the police of Cambridge and the City Council of Cambridge would defend this when a police officer goes rogue and uses these weapons indiscriminately. Thank you.
So I have a lot to say, but Councilor Nolan, you were next, and then I'll go to the commissioner and then the solicitor.
Thank you, Chair McGovern and everyone on the call. This is really has turned out to be a challenging discussion. I do want to start out by thanking the fact is we live in a city with a commissioner who did voluntarily say, this is something I didn't know we had, and not only are we going to get rid of it, but we're not going to use it. So that is something that we should be quite glad of. And I thank you, or through you, the chair, to the commissioner, and recognize that he also said earlier in this that he's open to anything that prevents the use of any weapon that endangers people. That was a very clear, unequivocal statement that I take to heart. And I'm glad that my police commissioner in my city says that and lives by it. There will always be a danger of, you know, we can't control everything. There may well be a danger of some individual who gets passionate. We all do it. And when a police officer does it, it is in a way totally understandable and totally something that we need to make sure that there's training such that it doesn't happen. And we know we've heard a lot from various training programs that help provide the police with the resources such that that doesn't happen. On this question, Chair McGovern, you put it very well, which is we seem to have different, just some differences of opinion, but also various parts of the law that seem to say, yes, you can do it, or no, you can't do it. I'm really in favor of doing everything we possibly can to go on record to say we will do what we can through training, through policies, through ordinance, to ensure that these weapons will not be used. So I would certainly be in favor of passing some kind of ordinance, but I also understand it is because we do live in a city that has already taken care of this. So I don't want it to be viewed as anything other than doing everything we can to prevent what we know is not a healthy situation, both physical and, as Vice Mayor Mallon said. And I know the commissioner has talked very much about, and in fact has brought in the, you know, the mental health and the safety and the emotional trauma of our police officers facing very challenging and difficult situations, that we owe it to them too, to provide everything we possibly can, not as a weapon, but for them in training. So I'm happy to move this forward and see where we go. And also on a logistics note, I am going to have to switch to a phone, which I will do probably shortly in a little bit, but I will continue to be in the meeting once I get that set. But I'm not sure I have any questions other than if we do move forward, again, we all have to step back and remember we should be really proud that we're in a city that's having this conversation, and that we are in a state where several other cities have already moved forward on this. I think that's a real positive. This is one where, as it's been said, I think both Boston and Somerville, I know there's other cities looking at it. It's a stance that we should be happy to take. And if this then enables our commissioner to do even more work to say, this is what I want to stand on, is that I already have this policy and we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure nothing's ever used. That seems to be supportive. So thank you, Chair McGovern. I yield.
Yeah, Commissioner.
So, yeah, through the chair, there's a lot of different things said, and I'll try to jot down stuff and keep up, but I wouldn't be able to keep up with everything. I just want to make clear that we keep everything in the context, and it's not for the benefit of the councilors or for Mr. Foyer. It's for the benefit of the general public who might be listening. That we're talking about limiting the use of certain things against peaceful demonstrators and peaceful protesters, not necessarily banning their use in overall context. One of the things that Mr. Foyer pointed out was that we still carry oleo resin capsicum spray, which is pepper spray, but my officers carry that individually every day and always have to make that distinction of whether to use it or whether to or not to use it. And so that's always a decision that they have. If we're talking about the use of limiting the use of indiscriminate weapons against peaceful protesters or those gathering peacefully. And that's in the context of what we're talking about. When we're talking about kinetic weapons, let's remember that we use kinetic weapons as a form of de-escalation in a contact and cover situation where lethal force would be appropriate to use. So when you talk about banning the use of kinetic weapons, that means you take away a less than lethal tool. So you want to be real concise and not conflate issues and talk about limiting the use of kinetic weapons against peaceful protesters. Because we do use kinetic weapons against and as a form of de-escalation where lethal force would be justified. So I just want to be clear that we don't conflate these issues. And another thing that the councilor said, Mr. Foyer said, was that a challenge will be more likely brought by a police officer who violated the law. I agree and disagree. I think a challenge will more likely be brought by a police union prior to, as soon as something was enacted. Whereas we talk about other cities and towns that haven't done so. I think that the distinction that the union would make is that the appointing authority is actually in support of, and where the appointing authority could just with a stroke of a pen accomplish the same thing, there's likely no reason to move forward with a challenge of it. Here, although the appointing authority is in support of the ban, there is no need to, less of a need to, because it's already banned. The use of tear gas is already banned by policy. So that's just the distinction that, several distinctions that I want to make, but, and that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Solicitor Glow, and then Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that I just think there's a really important principle here that's not being discussed. We are a society of laws. We live in a democracy. And like the federal government, we have a system of checks and balances. And as some of you were at the special meeting earlier today to talk about charter change, and one of you even said, you're elected to represent the people. That's your role as legislators. There's a role for the legislators in Plan E, and there's a role for the executive. And there are different branches of government, and the different branches have different responsibilities. So to simply say that because you have the physical power to pass some law, that your city solicitor under your ordinance and your charter is appointed, and as an officer of the court, I take my ethical obligations very seriously. I am the lawyer for the city council. I am your lawyer, not some guest who's been invited. Also, the things that your guest was saying about Chapter 41, Section 21 are simply flat out wrong. They're referring to boards of selectmen. There is law that specifically says that the Board of Selectmen is the equivalent of the city manager. It is the executive aspect of that any particular government that has a Board of Selectmen. We have a city manager in the executive position. So for the council to, I just hope that the council takes very seriously the importance of following the law. You are sworn to follow the law. The law says that this is not within your purview, and that's an important matter. So I think that I just also, with respect to some earlier comments about whether the city solicitor somehow might be more partial to views of the city manager, that's, there's no basis whatsoever for disrespecting the importance of obligations that anyone in this office holds. So I would urge the council to pay attention to the opinion that we've provided and to take seriously what I am saying with respect to your legal authority in this regard.
Thank you, Solicitor. I'm going to go to Councilor Zondervan, then I'm going to make a couple comments, and I will go back around to Councilor Sabrina Wheeler. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate all the arguments for and against, but I support moving forward with this ordinance, and so I'll be voting in support. I also support amending the preamble, as was discussed earlier, so that it references the fact that the tear gas has not been used for some time in Cambridge. I don't think we're going to settle the issue of whether or not the council has the authority to make this law. I've heard the solicitor, and I understand her arguments, but I am a supporter moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I'm going to make just a few questions and thoughts. I think also when we amend the preamble to note that, or how, wherever we put it, that we haven't used tear gas since, I think, 72, I think it's also important to note the proactive steps that the commissioner has taken in this regard. And I do, these are all very challenging conversations, and we're having a lot of these conversations around policing in the city, and everyone is, sickened and outraged and sad and angry about, what is happening around our country with the excessive use of force, and in many cases the murder that happens. And clearly, anything can happen anywhere. So I'm never going to say that we could not have an incident like that in Cambridge. But I also think it's important that we hold our national outrage and what we see in other communities in one hand, while also talking about what Cambridge does and what applies here. The comment was made earlier about the Capitol and, some of the rioters, having tear gas now, and then being former police officers. Now, I don't know whether they got that tear gas or that pepper spray from their police office, their police departments, or whether they bought it, at some, gun show somewhere. But I also look at the officers that were trying to push those folks back, and they were using tear gas too. And I'm not sure what they would have done if they didn't have even that to defend themselves. And so it does, look, it's just, it's ugly, it's messy. Nobody wants it to happen. But I do, I guess I have a question for the solicitor, but a question for the commissioner, because you had mentioned this, that, if we're taking away less
kinetic energy weapons, kinetic weapons.
Well, I'm blanking on the word, but if we're taking less lethal, ways to control the situation, and not just, there's the look, peaceful protests are one thing. A police officer who's getting physically assaulted by people, what does that police officer do if they don't have tools to defend themselves? And there was an earlier comment, and I'm not sure, and I don't think Mr. Foyer was suggesting this about, well, you can ban these things, but you'd still have like water cannons. I don't think we have water cannons. I don't think we would ever use water cannons, and I'm sure water cannons would cause a lot of bodily injury and whatnot. So, I guess clearly firing tear gas into a crowd of people indiscriminately is not something we would ever want to have happen. But what would an officer do if we're saying you can't even have tear gas or pepper spray on your belt? What happens in a situation where, is that not what the ordinance is saying? Okay, 'cause I thought that's what Mr. Foyer was saying, that it would also ban.
No, I was clarifying for the public that not to conflate the issues.
Okay.
We're talking
I
about the
understand.
campus.
I misunderstood that. I apologize. So scratch that. My question for the solicitor: if your legal opinion is, the council doesn't have the authority to do this, but the manager does, is there anything stopping the manager from filing an ordinance to solidify this more so than a policy? And would that make it more legal? And is there a willingness to do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, or you are Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair.
To me.
That isn't the way it would operate. If the city manager wanted to promulgate a policy, he has the authority to do so. In this case, of course, the commissioner has already promulgated a policy which accomplishes the goals of the proposed ordinance. Obviously, the manager always is permitted to submit a proposed ordinance to the council that is within their purview for you all to consider. But in this instance, if there were to be action by the city manager to take such a step, and let's say if there was a police commissioner who didn't agree with the manager, but the manager agreed with council or the community, I believe that the city manager does have the authority to issue such a policy. But I do think that it's most likely that a city manager would rely upon the appointed police commissioner to be in sync with the wishes of the administration and the people of the community. So it's not that the aim can't be achieved, which we've already done here with the commissioner's policy. It's that there's the council itself does not have the authority under the Plan E form of government to take this action.
So I think what you're hearing, councilors say is that, we certainly appreciate the police commissioner being, forward thinking on this as he is on a lot of things. And I do appreciate our police commissioner. And I'm very thankful that we have Commissioner Bard here rather than some other police commissioners I see around this country who oppose these things and fight these things tooth and nail. But I think you're hearing from the council that the council wants something stronger. And so you're hearing, so on one hand, we're hearing, hey, look, we're already doing this. So what's the point? You could flip that on its head and say, well, if we're already doing this and the manager agrees and the commissioner agrees, have the manager file an ordinance, avoid this debate over what's legal and what's not, and the council will pass it and people can still say, look what the council did and we passed this and we can still show leadership, but it maybe avoids the legal issue. I mean, it sounds like there isn't disagreement that we should ban these things. There's disagreement over how that happens, and there might be a way that if this would come from the manager and that would be more legally binding in your opinion, and I get it, there's a difference of opinion here. Is that a solution? I throw that out there to my colleagues. If we're already doing it, then have the manager bring it forward. Let's make it legal. The council can adopt it. We all win. Everybody gets to claim a little victory, and we have an ordinance that we feel is stronger than just a policy. So it's just a thought.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could, I need to walk back what I said a moment ago. In some instances, the manager would have the authority to issue certain policies. In this situation, as we've already discussed, under the state law, the commissioner has the authority to determine what weapons are used in the city of Cambridge under Chapter 41, Section 98, not 97. So I think that the fact that the commissioner has issued a policy, I would need to look more carefully at whether the city manager, in fact, can do that without the consent of the commissioner. And I don't know whether the commissioner wants to weigh in on that. I was trying to be responsive to what you were saying, Mr. Chair, but I do think that it's not just a question of form. It's also a question of, it's not just a question of who puts it in place. It is, sorry, it's not just the content. It's the point that this is something that's within the executive branch of the government. And
Right.
as state legislation makes clear, in addition, moreover, it's within the purview of the police commissioner to determine what weapons need to be used to defend the police officers and to defend the public in carrying out their police functions. So I did misspeak a moment ago, and I wanted to correct that. Commissioner, perhaps you wanted to correct me on that.
Commissioner, before you go, I mean, assuming that that's, that's all accurate and true, and I see Mr. Foyer, may not agree with that, but, lawyers, that's what lawyers do, right? You're arguing different points. Assuming that that is all true, unless and I don't want to put words, Mr. Commissioner, if the commissioner agrees with what's being proposed and the manager agrees with what's being proposed, then it is just a function of who brings it forward, potentially.
Well,
so, Mr. Commissioner,
through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's still nuanced. I think the way I read it, the city manager has the authority to promulgate that policy, and it would be binding, but then it wouldn't, in my opinion, and once again, I'm not a lawyer, but my PhD my doctorate is in government. It wouldn't need council action. He has the authority to issue that policy. So, I heard you say you would then want the council to act on it, and I don't think that part of it is necessary. And just pragmatically thinking of it, when you look at the Plan E form of government, it's unlikely that you could divest all executive authority into the city manager and then at the same time retain some executive authority. The two, fly in the face of each other. So I think if the manager promulgated a policy, then it's a policy, and that's it.
But if we want an ordinance, right, and what we're hearing from the solicitor is the council cannot file and pass the ordinance, right? And again, that's what the solicitor's saying. I'm not. But the city manager, in collaboration and agreement with the police commissioner, could file an ordinance. Is that, Ms. Gloa, would that ordinance come to the council for a vote, or does that, I would assume we'd still have to vote on it even if the manager brings it forward, right?
So, Mr. Chair, the manager has no legislative authority, just like the legislature, you have no executive authority. So the manager, and again, whether Commissioner Bard is correct that it's exclusively within whether I was correct in suggesting that the manager or the commissioner could enact policies or promulgate policies related to weapons, or whether that's just the police commissioner. The point is that whether it's both of them or the manager or the commissioner could take the contents of this proposed ordinance and incorporate more of those contents into a city policy or a police policy, and that would be permissible, but it would not be a law. It would not be legislation, because the executive does not pass laws. Only the council, the legislative body, can pass laws. But there is a difference in terms of what the authority is as executive versus the authority of the council as the legislative body.
And so the manager can't pass the law, but could the manager file something to the council and we pass the law? Does that get around this?
You mean give you back the executive authority that's divested from him via the charter?
If we're being told the ordinance can't come from us, it has to come from the manager.
No,
Maybe I'm just not understanding. I'm going to pass because I'm missing something here. And
well, Mr. Chair, it's not just a question of who does it. It's that it's an executive function, and that's, I think, what the commissioner might be getting at. And also, in addition, under the state law, it gives certain powers to police commissioners. So all of these legal schemes assign different rights and responsibilities and roles to various people and entities in various circumstances. So what I'm saying is that it wouldn't be more legal if the manager agreed with the content of an ordinance, because it's beyond the council's authority to promulgate an ordinance regulating the use of weapons, both because and in fact, one of the statutes that talks about how this operates says that the cities and towns have the authority to do things that are not repugnant to the general laws. Well, it is repugnant to both Chapter 41, Section 98 and the Plan E Charter for the council to be promulgating laws that are in excess of its authority. So And again, I am sorry that we're talking about differences of opinion because we've put a great deal of work into our opinions as the lawyers for the city. So I am thinking that is something you're taking into account. Thank you.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you. I was going to speak on a couple of different things. The one was the sort of what do we gain from this? Because I do think there are quite a bit we gain from this, and it's not just a restatement of existing policy. It is another layer of protection for our residents. Ordinances are the highest level of protection that we can pass as a city council. It would apply to other law enforcement under the jurisdiction of Cambridge and not just the police department as the existing policy would. It obviously wouldn't apply to the FBI, for example, that aren't under the jurisdiction of Cambridge, but it would apply to law enforcement bodies that aren't Cambridge, but that are under our jurisdiction. So an example is our local eviction moratorium, which also applies to the Middlesex Sheriff's Office. We don't control the Middlesex Sheriffs, but they're under that jurisdiction, and this would be too. It would also apply to chemical, crowd control, and kinetic projectiles, which aren't covered by the police department's tear gas policy. So all of those other types of chemical weapons, all of those other kinetic projectiles, that would regulate, as it does in the other cities that have passed this. In response to some of the other questions raised, I am happy to amend the preamble and thank my colleagues for that suggestion to make clear that we haven't used tear gas recently. I have an amendment I can send to the clerk. I also just wanted to make clear that this ordinance language does provide exceptions for use of non-lethal weapons. Jeff talked about some of the ones around kinetic projectiles. It also center 2 people, even in a crowd, if it was just on those 1 or 2 people and not indiscriminately on a group of 10, they would be able to. And those exceptions are in the ordinance. You know, I assume councilors understood them because there weren't a lot of questions on them tonight. I also just wanted to address a couple of the other questions. You know, neither Boston or Somerville, which have passed versions of this, have a board of selectmen. They have city councils like we do, and the city councils are the legislative authority in those cities, like the city council is the legislative authority here. The ordinances were initiated by the legislative authority in both Somerville and Boston. They weren't initiated by the mayor, who's the executive authority. So they follow very similar processes to what we followed here. The state law was referenced. Boston and Somerville are operating under the same state law. And just to be clear, you know, under Planning, we are the legislative branch. We pass laws. The city manager is the executive branch, and you know, as we talked about, doesn't have that authority. And that includes ordinances that we've passed in the past, right? The facial recognition ordinance, which regulates the police department, that was initiated by us as the city council, and it's sort of a similar process we're initiating here. We could have let the police department just issue their own policy, banning facial recognition policy, instead of doing an ordinance. But we didn't do that because we wanted to make sure there was an ordinance on the books. And I hope we can take that move here also. We haven't seen the ordinances on chemical crowd and kinetic projectiles challenged by police unions in Boston or Somerville. They're still on the books there. And at the end of the day, this is about the council deciding, you know, do we want to protect the right of police to use chemical weapons or kinetic projectiles if they want to, if at some point down the line they change their minds. I don't think this will be challenged if we pass it. So at the end of the day, this ordinance is about, you know, do we want to protect that right, or do we want to protect residents? I'm glad the police department has passed the policy banning tear gas. I just don't think that's, you know, we need to focus on protecting their right to change that. In general, this isn't a big ask. I'm still not really sure why there's pushback on this. As Councilor McGovern pointed out, you know, this isn't a huge ask or a big change in city policy, and I hoped we could work together on this, and I made the effort to reach out, you know, several months ago. So I do hope we can move forward with this. I did have the amendment to the preamble that I referenced. I'll send that to the clerk now.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, before you send that, we had talked about the amendment noting that the city of Cambridge has not used tear gas. Could we also, I don't know if you put this in, but I also think it's important to acknowledge the fact that the police commissioner has been forward thinking on this, and there is a policy and that already in place, but that we still feel that the ordinance is important, because I think that's an important piece for people to know. It's not just that we haven't used it because there hasn't been an opportunity to use it. And under the current commissioner past commissioners, there's been decisions made, not to. And just real quickly, while you're doing that, Counselor, I think that the commissioner had brought up, and I think it's a valid point, that we talk about how a policy, the next commissioner that comes in, hopefully not for a very, very long time, that the next commissioner could change the policy, just like another council could change an ordinance. I would say that it's more difficult to change an ordinance than it is to change a policy. To change an ordinance, there's a public process, there's a meeting, councilors are involved in that conversation. That is much harder to do than one commissioner saying, okay, I've decided we're back to, doing whatever. So yes, anything we do can be changed with the next council. And that's, we might as well not pass anything, because I know a future council, could change it. But there is a difference, I think, a significant difference between changing an ordinance and changing a policy. So I support the fact that an ordinance is stronger, and certainly would be a whole different conversation to retract than, a new police commissioner who has a different feeling about it.
Mr. Chair.
Chair McGovern?
Who is that? Councilor Nolan?
Yes.
Councilor,
sorry.
Hold on one second. Mr. Clerk?
Oh, Mr. Chair, I have the amendments. I don't know if you'd like me to share those.
All right, why don't you share them while Councilor Nolan goes. Councilor Nolan.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I just want to comment on, as I was listening, it seemed, if I was outside listening, I would say, wait, this is weird. So the city manager is not the legislative body. Executive, that makes total sense. So he can't actually pass an ordinance. The council is the legislative body, and yet we can't pass an ordinance. So that means we can only have a policy in the city. That's where it doesn't really make sense to me. Yeah. So I think we should be able to move forward with some kind of ordinance. Your comments, Chair McGovern, about having this be promulgated in some other way, I'm happy to do that, but I will comment that it seemed odd to the net result of the idea that neither the city manager nor the council could do an actual ordinance is that we wouldn't actually be able to have one, which again seemed odd to me. So I am on the phone. I'm not going to be able to see the amendments, but I will try to stay on so that we continue to have a quorum and we can vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Barr? Sorry, is the commissioners? Oh, maybe he had to step away. Okay. Mr. Clerk, do you want to, could you read the amendment for Councilor Nolan and others who might not be able to see it?
So read the proposed amendment into the record. It's to amend paragraph A titled Purpose to add an additional sentence at the end of that section. The sentence will read as follows: though the Cambridge Police Department has not utilized tear gas in any capacity over the past 30 years, and the Cambridge Police Department's administration specifically prohibits the use of tear gas via a department-issued policy number 408, the City Council wishes to do everything in its power to ensure tear gas, other chemical crowd control weapons, and kinetic impact projectiles are not used indiscriminately in Cambridge in the future.
Discussion? All right, I can't see who's got their hand up with this shared screen. Oh wait, here I can. Yeah. And nobody does. Is there any discussion on this amendment? All right, so the first order of business would be to address the amendment. And then again, that's not, then there's a separate vote that we would have to take on what to do with the ordinance as amended. So why don't we just clean up this first vote, vote the amendment, and then we can finish the discussion on the overall ordinance. So on the amendment, roll call.
On adopting the amendment proposed by Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, Councilor Carlone, absent. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
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 Yes. Councilor Simmons. Absent. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui, absent. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 in favor, 4 absent.
Okay, so you could pull that down. Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Chair,
Who said that?
this is the city clerk.
Mr. Clerk.
Just, this is not necessarily something that the council has to do today, but I just want to bring it to the body's attention that the ordinance doesn't specify, or the amendment, the proposed language does not specify where in the city's ordinances it should go. It's not numbered consistent with the ordinances. So at some point in the future, the council will have to make those amendments, but they can make those on the council floor, can make them here at a subsequent ordinance meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. So we have an amended ordinance in front of us. Again, I think we've heard two different legal opinions. I do want to thank the solicitor, and I do agree with the solicitor as the legal authority for the city. I also think that sometimes things have to play out and be argued to determine what where a court would fall on when there's a difference of opinion. I think there's certainly seems to be some legitimate arguments on both sides of this issue. So I would just any other comments from the council on how you wish to proceed, or the committee? Councilor Sabrina Wheeler?
Yeah, unless there are other comments or questions from other councilors, I'd make a motion to send it to the full council with a favorable recommendation.
So we have a motion by Councilor Sabrina Wheeler to move the amended ordinance to the full city council with a favorable recommendation. If there is no further discussion, looking for hands, going once, going twice. Roll call.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone, absent. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
She might need a second.
Councilor Nolan.
Are you waiting for me?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor
Sounds like
Simmons.
she's having a good time wherever she is. Sorry, Mr. Clerk.
Yes. Councilor Simmons, absent. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey, absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui, absent. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 in favor, 4 absent.
All right. So, Mr. Clerk, just again, I don't think anyone is maybe people are tuning in online, but the process from here forward, this will come before the council when the minutes are done. We will have to, we would do there's the opportunity for further amendments there. We'd pass it to a second reading and then finalize the vote. Is that?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. If there is nothing further, on a motion by Councilor Sabrina Wheeler to adjourn, roll call.
On adjournment, Councilor Carlone, absent. Vice Mayor Mallon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons, absent. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey, absent. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Mayor Siddiqui, absent. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 in favor, 4 absent.
Thank you all for your time. Have a good night.
You got a lot of